Good evening and welcome to our third night here at the Black Box Atelier 89 in Aruba. Thank you for joining us today in the sixth edition of our wonderful Caribbean Linked. We are so happy to have you together with us and also all of our artists. And we would like to thank our sponsors for believing in this creative dream. The Caribbean Linked is a amazing, wonderful program where artists from the Caribbean live together here for a few weeks and work together to be able to inspire and share their gifts and talents, not only with each other, but with the world and the Caribbean area. Tonight, we will be having presentations by two of our residents. Bahamian writer Ethan Knowles is going to start us off, and then afterwards, we're going to have Aruba based Venezuelan artist Samuel Sarmiento. Starting out tonight, Ethan Knowles is a writer and photographer from the Bahamas. We are very happy to have him with us. And he has recently completed a undergraduate degree from the university, the American University in Rome. And without further ado, I present to you Ethan Knowles.
Good night, everyone. Just a second as I pull up the presentation. Okay. All right. Okay, so thank you everybody for tuning in tonight. I'm very delighted to be here in the company of extremely inspiring cultural practitioners. And yes, and without further ado, I'll just get into a bit about me and my work. So my name is Ethan Daniel Knowles. I'm from the Bahamas, and as mentioned, I recently completed my undergraduate degree. I'm a writer, and my writing has a lot to do with the place that I come from. I'm very interested in landscapes, the way that the physical kind of informs the social and the cultural. So as you'll see, a lot of my work is interrogating not only the ways in which islands sort of form particular ways of seeing and being, but also the ways that people have navigated traditionally quite inhospitable spaces for a number of reasons. So to begin, we have a map, which is actually a satellite image that I went to the trouble of making black and white because I liked how it looked better. And tonight I want to start off with a little bit of trivia to contextualize what I'm about to say and just, wake everybody up. I know we're all busy. So yeah, first question is, how many islands are there in the Bahamas? You can just raise your hand. Okay, we've got a hand. Yes. 700, yes, there's actually even a liquor store called 700 Wines and Spirits. So there are 700 islands. The big one. Yeah, you mean Andrese. But anyway, yeah, so we have 700. And the next question is, how long is this distance from the top island, which is called Grand Bahama, and this bottom island here, Inagua? You want to guess? You can say miles or kilometers, whichever you prefer. All right, so it's about 500 miles from the top to the bottom, and it's part of a large, the Lucayan archipelago, in which Turks and Caicos Islands, which is right around here, also makes up. Yeah, because that's the name of the indigenous peoples which inhabited the Bahamas prior to European contact. And yeah, so going forward, I'll start with my first sort of exercise right down here. Very close to the coast of Cuba, which is right here, about 50 miles or so. And it was when I was working as a curatorial attaché in the Bahamas. So I was working with a collective called Plástico Fantástico, and also an Expo 2020 preparation group formed with people from the University of the Bahamas. And this particular island, 2017, if I'm not mistaken, reached Category 5 status, and I think it was a 4 when it hit Ragged Island, and rendered the island quite, it completely left it in disrepair. That I took during this trip, we actually took the mailboat down, which took multiple days. Mailboats are the typical ways in which goods and provisions are transported from. This is part of a 4-part series, which I actually worked on in collaboration with when she was working as the chief curator at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. And this story sort of just interrogates what it's like in the face of increasingly disturbing, increasingly destructive extreme weather events, what it's like for very small islands within a wider small islands collection of states. So the Bahamas is an archipelago with limited resources. And so every time that a hurricane comes and compromises a certain administrative center, there's always this discussion of uh, is it feasible to rebuild, and what is lost when the decision is no. So we went to to Duncantown, which is the chief settlement in Ragged Island, to interrogate how people are coming back from this tragedy, and looking at the people who stayed and the people who left for Nassau and other neighboring islands. So this is actually from the fourth iteration. I did 4 short stories, and the story was dealing with a young girl who returns to the island of her birth after having spent time with her extended family in the capital, and uh, and she's quite disturbed by what she's getting. Other reasons why people leave family: there's a lack of work. Maybe there's a specific opportunity, whether educational or otherwise, that can't be secured in the island. And yeah, it's kind of it's quite a dismal reality, because you do also have a question of cultural erasure. Because as we know, in the wider Caribbean, each island has a sort of microculture within, even if it's part of one country. And so with each hurricane season, there's a question of what will be lost, and how can these losses be mitigated slash sort of addressed or treated. And so, yeah, without further ado, I'll just read the excerpt, which comes right near to the end of the 4-part series. And this is from the whole series is called Field Notes on Loss and Belonging. And this is called Sinking, this particular extract. Warm water came gushing in like blood. I sat there in a stupor as the boat drank more and more. We were slowly being swallowed by the ocean, just miles offshore, and all I could think about was how, in the distance, Ragged Island looked like it was going down with us. Grandpa rushed for the flares, lighting one after another. Then he started combing the cupboards for life jackets. Meanwhile, I sat motionless. I wondered what my mother would do right now. Would she freeze up, or would she start to move and sweat? Really and truly, I had no idea. All I knew was that the boat was beginning to turn. I felt a cushion press against my back, followed by 2 quick snaps. Then Grandpa picked me up and, with unbelievable strength, hauled me onto the side of the boat as the whole thing began to roll over. With great effort, we crawled onto the underbelly of the boat, slicing our limbs on the blades of its barnacled skin. There we rested, panting, until Uncle Freddie and Auntie Mary came to our rescue in a dinghy. All right. So the next story is called Passing Through. And this I wrote for a call by the feminist platform Intersect Antigua, which did a call in autumn 2020 for stories from throughout the Caribbean on questions of colorism, queerness, carnival bodies, intimate partner violence, and a variety of other sort of sensitive themes within our region. And this particular story, the narrator recounts a series of ventures into hotel premises on his island, and he develops a very particular habit called souveniring. And this piece is interrogating not only what tourist spaces do to Caribbean islands, but also who can access those spaces and the ways in which we are negotiating our identity on the island based on who visits us and once we leave the island as well. So yes, and this was part of a water call, which was then repeated by the same organization a year later, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll read this excerpt, which is actually the very end of the piece, on the floor of an elevator of a certain distinguished hotelier. So there's layers to it. But anyway, I'll start reading. I began to consider what Julian himself would steal. What he would steal from the hotel room, yes, but more importantly, what he would steal from this place. Whether his souvenirs would be edible or magnetic, or whether they could be touched at all. I wondered what he would say when he finally left Paradise Island, what he would choose to reveal, and what, inevitably, he would withhold, because that too is a theft. What I do not wonder is what he has stolen from me. This, I decide, will be another rule. What his nails, hungry as surf, have scraped off the walls of this body and eaten, I do not dare examine. I know I am losing things on Paradise Island, but at least I maintain I am no longer losing my mind. At least I am making my way to a destination. This is what I tell myself, though I am always lying. To be clear, what I find myself walking into on these night trips is no destination at all, only a place of somewhere escaped, a place of passing, a purgatory. For me, each resort is a new opportunity to steal and be stolen from. I cannot get enough of either of these. The things that are small enough to be big and common enough to be uncanny. The things that separate those who are passing through and those, in one way or another, are passed through. The speaker actually develops of having small objects from the people whose hotel rooms he frequents. Yeah, so this piece was an experience. So I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with Pre, which is a Caribbean literary platform out of Jamaica, spearheaded by Annie Paul. I wrote this piece actually when I was studying in Italy, and I found it almost easier to write it than when I was at home, which is an interesting thing in itself. Another interesting thing about this piece is that the entire ending was changed once I submitted it because I had such great editors from the team. And so what I was kind of a lazy ending at the beginning became much more true to the rest of the story and much more impactful in the end. And this piece is looking at the ways in which we remember, similar in a way to the first piece that I spoke about, the ways that we interrogate our cultural spaces, the ways in which we present information, and sometimes information that is only so easy to access and so easy to regain. And in this piece, there are two main characters. One is Yuma, the narrator, and then the other is Paloma, who, in Yuma's words, the story is about. And this piece is taking issue also with the idea of knowing something by writing it down, because there's a piece in which Yuma says, they kept telling me to write about it and I would understand it, and I refused. I didn't think it was meant to be understood. And so there's a way in which the story has its own tension about being a story, and the way it's written is almost as if it's being told to someone else. So there's a very embedded oral aspect to it. And the museum is the third main character. So I chose this particular extract in part because Pre also chose to highlight it. So I was like, maybe this is something that people connected with. So yeah, it was difficult though. I did want to choose a different paragraph as well, but I was like, I only have so much time. Okay, so yeah, let me read it. The museum, though well equipped, was characterized by certain absences. Strict timelines had been abandoned in favor of a more gestural grouping of artifacts. Intricate straw crafts overflowed from one shelf to another, while colorful raffia and crepe paper costumes danced between rooms. Great canoes carved some 500 years ago by Lucayan hands sat alongside estate records and recently processed sponge. There was an entire wing dedicated to the utility of goats. I was quite disoriented during my first visit, though I gradually came to appreciate Paloma's unconventional curatorial decision. I found myself utterly bewildered on a number of occasions. Coherence could not be found in the museum. The rooms made no sense. Labels did not clarify, but only confused further. Time, having spent itself, gave up the fight and stewed in the corner like a fish. So after that, you should just read this story. I think it's hard to like. This comes at a point in which Yuma is trying to engage with Paloma because they used to go to school together, and she notices that Paloma is not doing very well. She seems vacant, a little bit detached, and Yuma is negotiating to what extent she can care for her, or like what actions of care are within the boundary of her like relationship with her. Like you can only go so far for somebody you don't necessarily have a relationship with, and so she's deciding what boundary to cross amongst other. And so the whole story is kind of about how do we draw boundaries between different periods, different spaces, and people, and how eventually those boundaries can break down and in the first place maybe weren't valid or didn't exist in the like to begin with. And so it's about boundaries, and so I titled it Boundaries. Yeah. Oh, now we're on to poetry. Okay. So this I submitted to Arc Poetry magazine, which is a Canadian poetry magazine, because they had an issue about the Caribbean influence on North America. Again, I was studying this time, and so this is a diasporic poem, essentially. And I chose the title Percolate because I'm very interested in limestone, which makes up the Bahamas physically, but the ways in which it's porous. Things like every household prior to running water had a personal well or cistern of some kind, and like Saharan dust collects annually in layers in the limestone. You can tell when it's like eroded by the sea. And so there's so much history and story within the limestone itself, and it influences the Bahamas so much because it prevents lots of different agriculture and at the same time makes space for others. Yeah, so I'll just read this one. She asks me where I from. I tell her, Miss Lady, I come from far. She asks, how far? I say, dead far. She asks, down under? Soon. Equator, not quite. I come from Honeycomb, weather working raw. In my free time, I just like percolate. She asks, how deep do you go? I tell her, freshwater lands. Dig too deep and you cause problem. Then she asks, but what is the biggest problem? And I tell her, to be impermeable. So yeah, the speaker is again, it's being said to someone else. So it's not like it's not like Dal Vivo. It's not En Vivo, I think it's Spanish. Yeah, it's always like a story that's being told after the fact, and yet the dialect is like present tense. So you don't say like when you're referring to past events, you don't say I said. In Bahamian dialect, I say, and it's a different understanding of time. So yeah, this was submitted and then published. So I have a physical copy of this. I think that's the first time I got paid for my poetry too. So wasn't a bad accomplishment. This one I really like, not to big up myself, but I do really like this one. This is called The Tropic of Cancer, which I wrote another poem called A Better Latitude, which is also interrogating lines of latitude. Again, really like geography. And this one came to me because I imagined the Tropic of Cancer, which cuts through the island that my extended family is from. I grew up in the capital, but island. And I imagine the Tropic of Cancer as this big clothesline that was sort of billowing in the wind. And I just wanted to make a poem about that image. And in addition to that image, I also wanted to interrogate the ways in which Bahamian women are doing a lot of unrecognized. So this story is also inspired by the fact that my mother and grandmother always used to tell me about how they had to do all the washing in big tin tubs, which is quite arduous. And so this poem, which I might also read in standard English because I think it's like it might be difficult to access, but it's looking at ways in which society divides work when there isn't an evident matriarch. So the ways in which labor is distributed when there isn't a woman who would usually be sort of ascribed that role. So the speaker is frustrating gender in this piece, not only by the way that they're seeing themselves or talking about themselves, but also the work that they're doing in a society that is quite strict or otherwise, unless it can't be strict, I guess. So yeah, this is called Tropic of Cancer. Oh, also this was solicited. Like there was a call from Conky, which is this Instagram account that interrogates Bahamian history and is really supporting a lot of young creatives and revisiting lessons in history which are not always treated as deeply as they should be in the national curriculum. So when the men reached back from the big boat, it was plenty washing. I did and grime like juveniles, because if it wasn't me, getting done. I ain't even no real gal, but I the closest they get. So to make the work easier, I take an up tree, because in my yard, there'd be. When it finally came time to dry, I hung my lot on the Tropic of Cancer. But the line was so long that the washing sailed away on the trades. I say, the next time these men go out on the big boat, they could be fishing linen. So yeah, it's basically saying that the men have gone out on a fishing boat, which is ordinarily like weeks at a time, and the speaker is scrubbing and scrubbing, freeing grime from the clothes fish because you throw those back. Because if it wasn't this person, it wasn't getting done. They're not even a real woman, but they're the closest they have, which can be interpreted in different ways. And so because different kind of approach to labor, they're also taking a break, basically. It's like not always about grinding. And then, yeah, and so like the speaker hangs the laundry on the Tropic of Cancer, which is a line of latitude, which, you know, can be done. And then eventually the washing sails away on the trade winds. And so the speaker makes a joke that the fishermen will be fishing up the clothes. And so this one is also, I think, encapsulate the way that a lot of Bahamians and also the like wider Caribbean approaches like day-to-day realities and the way that things are going to get done, even if they're difficult. And a sense of humor sort of alleviates the pressures and the difficult. What are, especially on family islands in the Bahamas, not easy conditions to live. So yeah, that one, I think that one's different. This one is sort of tapping into a little. It's I'm not sure if it's called a money bat in other countries, but I think in Jamaica it's called a duppy bat. But it's those big moths in corners. And in the Bahamas, if you see one, it's good luck because it'll bring you money, especially if it lands on you. And so this is from the perspective of one of those bats, well, moths. But yeah. So this is called kissing the corner of your veranda. I was upside down, unsure whether to live or when you caught me kissing of your veranda. I was ashamed of myself. Frayed wings, strength fading. I had not eaten. In that moment, still as your eyes studied me, made meaning with my patterns. I felt it disrespectful to flee. Freshly comatose sun. So I waited till you turned away to free myself from the ceiling and sail onto your shoulder. I knew you had no need a money bat, but I felt the need. I had not landed on one human my entire life. Yeah, this one I just was feeling it. I don't know, I was really feeling it. So, yeah, I don't think I have very much else to say on that one. This is moving into more, I think about two, yeah, these are the last two. So more recently, after I did an internship at the Office of the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, speech writing, I got more interested in development, the ways in which small island states are charting trajectories in a global political sphere, but also on the level of the nation state and the region specifically. This piece I wrote in collaboration with a Barbadian student, and her name is Malia Archer. And it was quite difficult to do because it was a joint article, and we didn't know how to write it because the point of the issue and the magazine more broadly, which is called Panoramic, is global issues with local voices. And we didn't really know which person to use because it was talking about personal context. And although we developed a soft binary between Barbados and the Bahamas, we say soft because there are notable differences and their like trajectories, like historically, politically. We also just didn't really know how to write the essay in a way that would be cohesive. And so we ended up doing sort of sections where the first part, which is what I start with right here, this is actually the very opening. And then she does a part which says Malia. And then at the end, we come together with one voice and discuss our thoughts. And yeah, so I think I'm going to read this first and then talk about the entire sort of thinking about the article. Yeah. It was mango season and the Poncianas were spilling crimson. Sweat were just beginning to mar my well-starched, thick, gray, and ill-suited for that late subtropical spring when, despite much thought on the matter, I failed to make a decision. American spellings in English. A decision that surely impact the rest of my life, albeit in the most insignificant way imaginable. It was merely a decision that, once made, would allow me to get on with the business of language, which, in a region of dialects, creoles, and endless linguistic innovation, was a capricious one to begin with. And the essay is basically looking at the ways in which I relate choosing spelling, like how to spell words, because in the Bahamian system, you can spelling, you just have to be consistent. And I relate that to a broader sort of qualm or tension in the Bahamas' political trajectory, wherein we're almost 50 years independent from the UK. We are moving away, obviously, and have moved away from British sort of influence. And at the same time, the increasing new neo-colonial actor, the United States, is also influencing our trajectory. And so there's a question of how are we not only spelling our words, but spelling out our own sovereignty in this current moment, when one sort of actor has seemingly supplanted the previous one. When, not to say that the determined is not, the future is not being self-determined, but in the context of the geopolitics of the region, there's a way in which the sovereignty of nation states is constantly subject to influence, is not stable. For instance, the Bahamas just recently gained control of its own airspace. So we eventually moved from discussing the ways in which Barbados was always seen as Little England, and therefore a degree of Britishness was embedded into Barbadian sense of identity. And then with the coming of the independence, there's a way in which nationality became the forerunner of determining a sense of self in the global geopolitical sphere. And we sort of kind of relate that also to the Bahamas, but with slightly different influences. And at the end, we kind of make the argument that though nationalism for post-colonial states specifically is quite important as a celebration of something that wasn't always there, and a way to assert a stable self-image which has constantly been under siege, it's quite useful. But in practice, given multilateral institutions, geopolitics, there's a way in which nationalism, specifically for small island developing states, it doesn't promote sovereignty. Sovereignty is most effectively promoted with regional integration, with regional collaboration, and the ways in which states with multiple voices coming together to form one unit can have a greater sway within the larger sphere. And so we were just interrogating the sense of what does it mean to spell out a sovereign nation with a particular kind of history and a particular kind of region. And it was an interesting thing because I learned more about Barbados and I learned also more about the Bahamas in thinking about this. And it's just kind of, it's not really like this isn't published in like an academic journal. This is kind of more of op-ed. But it's a way to kind of understand the ways in which a passport and sort of identifying with one nation in a larger international sphere. For some states, that also connotes a similar sense of sovereignty, independence, and like international weight. But for lots of post-colonial states in particular, there's a way in which envisioning just the nation state is not actually it's not actually tenable. It's not sustainable. And we see this when Audley and Philip Davis, so the prime ministers of the Bahamas and Barbados, are advocating at COP26 and like the UN, not only for one country but for a whole region of vulnerable countries, which to a certain extent were created based on the trajectory of the entire international capitalist system. Yeah, and so that was most recent. That's quite a recent piece. This was published in 2022. And this last piece is a blog I wrote for my own website, which has since expired. Might put it back online. And it's about returning to Nassau, which, as I talk about in the piece, was always greeted as quite a ridiculous decision, especially for someone who had multiple scholarships, quite great grades, ability to emigrate. It was always met with resistance. And so I described these sort of attacks on my own decision making as squalls, as like violent mini storms. And I also discussed to what extent I was a good investment because my government gave me money to go stay abroad. So I was kind of jokingly imagining like the scholarship money I received in Bahamian dollar bills, in my room, and to what extent is this money going to waste in the opinion of my government? So it's kind of just joking around with this sense of a young sort of like what is viewed as successful in the region, and also not just the decision is like to come back is one thing, and the decision base is an entirely more complex thing. This is the very beginning of that piece, which is divided into 4 sections. And this section is called Strange Convections. And I fell victim to strange convections. They came without notice, a series of squalls, brief, violent, and evidently immune to the Saharan dust spinning above our heads. They attacked the limestone where I stood, ate away at it, seeped into it, unleashed cavities. On these occasions, when sharp gusts and stinging rain threatened otherwise solid foundations, I found myself struggling to stand upright. Things of which I had been sure for a very long time suddenly became less sure. Nice. Yeah, I like that piece too. Also because I was writing it because I needed to write.
Thank you so much to Ethan Knowles. We're going to open the floor for any questions directed towards him. Here we go.
Hey man.
Good night.
Hey, thanks for the talk.
Thank
I
you.
just I had a few things. Like I enjoyed the double entendre of the moth story. It was very sweet. And then yeah, I had a question about this sovereignty one. Can you go back to that slide? So it was interesting to hear because in my country, since we're still connected.
Which country is that?
Cayman Islands. Oh yeah. Since I'm from the Cayman Islands, so my country, we're still indefinitely tied to the British. We're British citizens. So I found it kind of interesting to think about sovereignty from what's possible in my country, because I think that's something that is kind of difficult to kind of do, seeing as we're still intrinsically tied. And if we were to leave, it would metastasize and get too complicated. So I just wanted to know, in your research for this, were any other islands considered, or was it just a direct conversation between Bahamas and Barbados? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so for this piece and the whole issue and the entire magazine, everybody is usually writing from the perspective of 1 or 2 countries of which they have like an intimate connection. So this actually magazine was formed by somebody who went to the United World Colleges, which is a system I went to as well. It's just kind of trying to talk about like pressing issues from perspectives that are kind of concerned with them intimately, and in a way that isn't the popular sort of narratives. So we weren't trying to do anything too transgressive with this piece. I think lots of people have made arguments for regional integration. There's been obviously lots of failures, but there's a way in which, especially now in the context of COVID and also the collapse of the tourism industry, where the bargaining power of our countries is especially limited. And I think there's a hesitancy to give up, which is part of CARICOM, but not the single market. There's a hesitancy to give up a sense of national sovereignty, which in the long term, I would argue, sacrifices a more robust and sustainable regional sovereignty. Because we might be 700 islands, but we don't have 700 economies. A very practical level of material resources. There's a way in which I don't know, regionally making decisions and moving forward, as difficult as that is and has proven to be, can result in a net benefit for people who are living in the region. Talking about our countries.
Cool, because I would love to see a whole series debating sovereignty specifically to each, because me and Taisha were having a conversation about the tendency of people in the Caribbean to overgeneralize systematic struggles as if they're one unified Caribbean struggle, where each country can have its own multiplicities and things that lead to differences in how their systems work. So, but you said that earlier, how you said Barbados are similar but different, and that's why you two respected and had one section for you, one for her, and then a conjoined, which is, I think, I don't know, I'm just interested by it, the whole idea of what is sovereignty, and then also, is it necessary, seeing that sovereignty is a Western philosophy? But yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
No, thank you for your question.
Thanks for the.
Thank you. Does anybody else?
So, could you hear me? Yeah, okay. Concerning the last writing that you did with coming back to to Nassau, I find like there's could you describe a little bit the different ways you how should you express what you when you need to write? For example, that one, the process, your creative process in writing, is there different venues, or is each one of them completely original, or is this like are there different patterns? Like this one, there are some that you read and then you didn't really describe. Really, you've said but I don't have anything much to say about it because, and I'm very much curious by that type of writing and the creative process behind that, those expressions. Yeah.
So for the kids, essentially narrative nonfiction, because it's like it's almost like a memoir. More refined versions of things I've ever written about. In this case, I knew I wanted to write about going back to Nassau because it's something that a lot of my friends were, like, a decision they were considering, and in many cases not taking. So I wanted to write this piece not only to sort of digest my own thoughts about returning to the Bahamas, but also to see what other people felt about this whole decision, this very consequential decision, or at least what seems quite consequential. I actually just wrote this in a Word doc, and when I was trying to figure out about how am I going to make this transition, because I had been returning to Nassau for about 6 years, because I would go back for Christmas, for summer, so I was always coming back, but I was never coming back for good or for like an indeterminate amount of time. And so I wrote this piece to kind of see how I felt about it, because a lot of the times when I'm writing something, I don't know how it's going to end up. Yeah, and then the thing about this is I shared this, and I have never gotten so many like interactions, I guess, because I put it on my Instagram, and then I had people from like, because I studied with people from all over the world. I had people from like South America, relating to the piece, even though it was very much specifically rooted in my own. I had people saying like, this is exactly what it felt when I left this university and went back to Peru. This is what it felt like when I was deciding whether or not to do my OPT in the United States, etc. And so I like that it is quite personal and at the same time universal. And I approached this piece almost out of a necessity because I make that decision and how I was going to live the whereas in the case of this was just kind of like a response to the issue future. So thinking about what future would look like in the Bahamas. The poems are usually, the poems I'm usually just writing in notes, like in my Mac or my phone. And they're usually kind of, I'm going more for mood than I am for content. Usually the content kind of comes from a specific mood, scene, or image. Because I was thinking about it for a while, it's actually somewhat owned by a relative of mine who runs a museum on a family island. And this one I wrote, again, out of necessity. It's kind of almost in a similar, this one is fiction, but it's in a similar, like exploring thoughts that need to be explored. And then this I wrote as part of like a work engagement, so, but also a personal interest. So I came up with the format. I went to Ragged Island without knowing exactly what I would be writing and how it would be written, and that's what came out of it. So I think it depends on the like actual kind of writing, and then the process kind of forms because of the type of writing.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions. So a round of applause for Ethan for his presentation. Thank you so much. We're going to take a very short break, and when we return, we're going to continue with our artist Samuel Sarmiento, so stay with us.